Hello, Internet! Gino, that Pinguino Grieco here again with another episode of Deep Listens. And if I sound extra silky smooth, it's because I've got a slightly different microphone, and hopefully I'll sound better now. Sounded okay before. Trying a little better. So this time, for this episode, we're going to be talking a little bit about speedrunning. Why are we talking about speedrunning, you ask? Well, the reason is because the Giant Bomb Community Endurance Run is rapidly approaching. And in years past, we have done multiple speedrunning events. This year, I won't be speedrunning anything. Billy seems to be working on some speedrunning stuff. And so we thought it would be a good time to look back on our experiences in the speedrunning community. And as I was playing a little bit of a story about my uncle, I couldn't help but think that this must be a pretty fun game to speedrun. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more next week. But until then, let's just spend a little time to talk about speedrunning and what it's about, how you can get into it, what kind of games make for good speedruns to watch or participate in, and just have a good time talking about a really fun topic. And I'm joined, as always, by Billy Fast Pace Rothert.
Yeah, usually I am a very deliberate, slow and steady wins the race kind of person. I'm very methodical when I do tests and quizzes, show all my work. When I am fighting or sparring, I typically play defense. I'm on the back foot, a lot. But when I'm playing video games, I go hard and fast. No stops. No breaks. No breaks till the finish line.
I'm glad you decided to say go. What? Dang it, Billy. And we are also joined by Pete, Responsible Speed Busby.
What's going on, everybody? I don't have as much experience with speedrunning as these two great speedrunners themselves, but I have a slight history with it, and we're glad to share it. And perhaps the neophyte, if any of our listeners are less familiar with the scene.
First thing I got to clarify, I am a shitty speedrunner.
Yes, we are both
get something straight.
We are both fairly bad at speedrunning, but we are capable of it. We know enough about the dark arts to invoke them, but not to control them.
Did you just say drop charts?
No, I said dark arts.
Oh, I got excited for a second.
That's what I do wrong. But before we move on, my animal facts for this week's podcast.
Is it about Exhibit? It better not be about Exhibit.
It is not about Exhibit. We're just discussing Exhibit. But it's animal adjacent. It's an interesting fact. So in the early 20th century, right, sort of 1910-ish area, America was facing a meat shortage. And, vegetarianism was obviously not an option. So what they proposed instead for their solution was to import hippopotamuses and settle them in the Louisiana bayous and create what the newspapers refer to as lake cow bacon. So they were going to ranch hippopotamuses for their meat in the Louisiana bayou. And if you want to learn more about this, I got it from a great article in the Atavist magazine. It's old. It was from about 2013, but it's great. It's called American Hippopotamus by John, I hope I pronounce this right, John Mooallem, Mooallem, Allem, all one word. But it's a great article. It's long. It's interesting, and it details this whole incredible hippo ranching story.
Wait, did people bring hippos and try to put them in the Mississippi River?
No. So it did get far enough to to propose a bill in Congress, but I think it was ultimately shot down. But it got pretty far. People were on board.
Okay, thank God. That's a real dodged bullet in terms of just wrecking the ecology of a location forever.
Ecological knowledge not at its height in the early 1900s. Yeah.
No, we got all sorts of
about the environment.
All sorts of great decisions around that time. I think the dude what released all the birds from Shakespeare was around that time and polluted the entirety of North America with sparrows and starlings.
When was Australian cane toads too? I'm going to look up when that
cane toads was like the 1950s, I believe. So we were even further along when that happened.
Still a terrible decision.
And the Hawaiian, yes, that was really bad. Yeah, humans not great with foresight. It's also after the dodo bird got extincted by rats.
I mean, they weren't doing shit to begin with.
I mean, they were adorable flightless birds.
I'm not saying any animal deserves to go extinct. I'm just saying Dota wasn't that great.
Fair enough. Well, as we as humans are rapidly approaching our own extinction, let's talk about other things that move rapidly, like speedruns. We don't have any feedback for this week, but if you want to get feedback in, you can do so at Deep Listens Pod or at That Pinguino on Twitter, deeplistens.libsyn.com, or deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com. And so without further ado, speedrunning. Why don't we just go ahead and start off by saying how familiar each of us are with speedrunning, like what kind of speedrunning we've done, and then go from there. So, Billy.
I would say I am very familiar with speedrunning as a fan and an observer. I casually just watch speedruns of my favorite games in my spare time without any prompt or reason to do so. I just watch them purely for entertainment. I have watched and donated to all of the past Games Done Quick events. We'll talk about GDQs, I'm sure. I'd say the past maybe 5 or 6 GDQ events I've donated in some way, shape, or form, and watched and even recorded some of them so I could watch them later if they were in weird times. So I'm a really, really big fan of the community. I've been following the speedrunning community for maybe 5 or 6 years. And as a speedrunner myself, I have done speedruns in the past. I have not broken any records. I'm not a competitive speedrunner, but I have watched a speedrun that has been really cool and said, I want to do that too. And I've been able to emulate, that same kind of precision and same kind of speedrunning technique, although I will say with much less consistency, so that I couldn't regularly do it in front of a crowd. I should say that. I'm an amateur speedrunner, but a little bit experienced.
Yeah, and you've done a little bit of speedrunning in front of a crowd for the Giant Bomb Community Endurance Run in the past.
Right, and the most recent, when I did my first speed run, that was a speed run proper, it's for a category that doesn't exist to my knowledge.
Which means you have the record. Congratulations.
I guess, sure. I guess I do have the record, but I've done 2 proper speed runs in front of a crowd. One of them was my Shadow of the Colossus run, where I beat the game 4 times consecutively, and then had just enough stamina to climb to the top of the tower in Shadow of the Colossus, and that one was successful. I was able to do it in the estimated time. That specifically did not use a glitch that allowed you to have infinite stamina. It made me get my actual stamina meter all the way up by killing Colossus over and over again. And I used specific speedrun tactics like really precision, frame perfect timings for certain animation skips, and I guess what I would loosely consider sequence breaking some Colossus fights.
Yeah. We can go into the specifics of each of the runs in the future. I just more meant which games have you speed run, Shadow of the Colossus. In front of
a crowd. The other one was Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles that you and I did. We did not actually succeed at that one, but I did plan the route. So those are the ones that I've done in front of a crowd. I'll talk about some of the specific games that I have run just offline in personal time later.
And Bastion, it wasn't a real speed run. It was weird. That was weird.
That was an endurance run. So was my Legend of Zelda run. Was an endurance run.
Yes. Pete, any experience speed running?
Sure, but before we get to that, what is the past tense of speedrun? Is it sped run, speed runned, speed ran?
I go with speed ran personally.
Speed ran? Okay.
I have speed run.
I think it has to be speed ran.
And that'd be my guess. But okay, so the only game I've ever really actively tried to speed run would be Microsoft Office Solitaire. I got deep into that, trying to beat that as quickly as you could. I got my time down pretty low too at a certain point. I can't quite remember it now, but it was definitely sub 1 minute. It should be
close to 3 minutes.
No, before, so with the Microsoft Office, you could right click to auto steal the card. So when you got to a certain point, it would just start to fly for you.
I didn't have that.
Yeah, well, you gotta know these tricks, bro.
Sorry.
So I don't have much experience speed running myself, but like Billy, I do enjoy watching them on YouTube, so I'm aware of the general conceit and what people vastly superior to me look like doing them.
Yeah, and I like the idea. This is a frame perfect skip in solitaire coming up.
This is a sequence break in solitaire coming up, man. We're gonna clip out of bounds.
That ace is not supposed to go on top of that 2, but he's gonna make it happen. We're gonna see it right here. Yeah. So for me, I have speed run. I've speed run a few different games. I've done Final Fantasy 8, 9, and 5, but my 5 run was very weird. I did a
Was
speed
that your
run.
Fiesta run?
It was a 4-job Fiesta speed run.
Oh,
So I combined.
What were your jobs again, if you recall?
My jobs were. Okay, what was the first one?
wait, what was the one you couldn't get to?
I think
You had
my
to
first
not
one
get
was
Thief.
Warrior.
You had
Yeah,
to like not
I needed
get
to
Thief
not get
first.
Thief really badly. I believe it was
Thief, that was it.
Warrior. I know I had Chemist because that's how I finished the game. And then did I have Red Mage and what was the third one? I don't remember off the top of my head. It was a while ago. I went into a fugue state to finish that one.
I know you had 3. Like I know you got one of your first pick classes, and I think you got 2 like viable classes, and only one was like kind of a bad one.
Yeah, I think I got like one
Did you get
mediocre
Beastmaster?
one.
You might have gotten Beastmaster.
No, I didn't get Beastmaster because that requires a bunch of weirdness that I don't remember doing. I know that the only one that mattered was I got Chemist. Once I was allowed to use some chicanery to guarantee that I got Chemist, and once I got Chemist, everything was okay. Because you can beat that game's really broken when you have Chemist. So I wouldn't say that any of them were anywhere near a record. Like, I don't know that there is a 4-job Fiesta speedrun category, but I definitely was not.
I feel like they would call it the 4-job Fiesta though. If you had it, if it was a category, they would use the same nomenclature.
Yeah, so that's the only one that I've done weirdly, and then I've also done Mass Effect on easy mode. I got through a Mass Effect quite quickly. So I would say that those are the ones that I've practiced and completed, all of them for community endurance runs in some capacity. So I've learned quite a bit. And of the Crystal Chronicles run. So a lot of my speedrunning practice have been with role-playing games and specifically JRPGs in the past. Though Crystal Chronicles and Mass Effect, like Mass Effect's not that hard to speedrun. It's some light shooting. And then Crystal Chronicles, man, that game. So with speedrunning, what is it that you guys find so appealing? Because I feel like speedrunning has become pretty popular now with games done quick. What do you think it is about speedrunning that gets people, gets the people going?
I think you should go first, Pete.
So in my mind, there's sort of 2 main ways you can approach it, right? And I find one far more interesting than the other. What goes into it, one is, depending on the game, there's a lot of sort of just general fast twitch skill, right? There's just, in terms of inputs, moving correctly, hitting those sort of frame perfect motions, you need a certain dexterity to it. That I bet is interesting for a lot of people just as display of skill. Now, I don't find that nearly as interesting as when you have these other sort of, RPG styles or other such games that just require such meticulous planning. To my mind, that's the most interesting part, right? Is coming up with your line, basically. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. Here's when I'm going to do it. Here's the order it has to happen in. And I think while like watching somebody spend the amount of time to plan that line would probably be super tedious, watching them execute it and more importantly explain why that is the way it needs to be executed, I think is far more interesting.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Billy, anything to add?
Yeah, I like speedrunning because I know that almost every single speedrun today is a collaborative effort. And we should talk a little bit about the community and the history of speedrunning. But I know that right now, whenever a new game becomes popular among speedrunners, there's typically like teams and teams of people that are individually working on trying to break the game and trying to find new exploits and find new glitches and find new ways to just shred a game to pieces. and that collaborative effort creates something that's almost an artistic work of, I guess, precision and skill. So I like the collaborative nature of the speedrunning community right now. Plus, it's doing really cool stuff with charities, and that's just super dope.
Yeah. For me, I think that speedruns, there are multiple categories that really kind of pique my interest. Like you said, Pete, there's the kind of fast twitch, just mastering of a system by the system's own rules. You know, I'm going to play Super Meat Boy, but I'm going to play it perfectly. And that can be engaging and really appealing to see, just like levels of execution that I could never approach. And that is just like drilling and repetition and practice. There are some speed runs, I mean, all of them require drilling and repetition and practice, but that is one that is kind of the rawest exhibition of skill as you would approach the game, you know, as a layman, right? Then you get some of the speed runs that kind of become about, like you said, Pete, just like planning, just knowing the systems inside and out. But I feel like that one is also a lot about deep, intricate motion, knowledge of the systems, right? You know, you're not necessarily you're executing things quickly, but there's a layer of systems that you're mastering, and that allows you to move through the game faster than just, you know, pressing the X buttons faster and menuing faster. Like, you know, knowing the perfect route in an RPG. The moment where I really fell in love with speedrunning was when I realized that there's another layer, meta layer outside of that, when you start thinking about, okay, this is a piece of software running on hardware, and there could be problems with that. Like, there might be glitches there, or, you know, this is a video game with certain conceits built into its engine and its systems, and that could mean that there are exploits. And it almost becomes like a hacker analyzing a piece of software to find vulnerabilities. And that is when, like, speedrunning really clicked for me. I think it was when I was watching a Psychonaut speedrun, and one of the key moments and key abilities in that game is that when you're speedrunning it, if you're running on a PC that's running at more than 60 frames per second, or maybe it was more than 30, there's certain run speeds which PCs are capable of doing that the PS2, that the original game came out on, PS2 and Xbox, it just couldn't run that quickly. And so when you run the game on a PC, there's an ability to glide using a thought bubble, and its intent is to be used as a glide. But when you're running at a faster frame rate and you click basically to activate the thought bubble fast enough, you can actually fly, because there's a like 1 frame jump that happens or like a 1 y-axis jump that happens at the beginning of the animation, and if you just keep clicking it over and over and over again, you keep canceling the last animation into a new animation, and you gain height on what is supposed to be a slow descent. And so it allows you to fly through the game and reach areas you're not supposed to be able to reach. It allows you to bypass entire levels of platforming, like all of that stuff. And it is because someone looked at it and went, hey, this game is running at a weird speed on the PC. I wonder if that's a vulnerability, basically. And those runs, like I watched a run where someone played Super Mario, I think Super Mario World, I believe it was, and they plugged in not just a regular controller, but they plugged in basically a multi-tap, and then plugged in like additional controls into the multi-tap, and were able to put in a bunch of inputs by doing it that way to reprogram the game by writing to spots in memory that the game is not ordinarily supposed to be able to write to, because it wasn't protecting against people putting in inputs on these extra slots that most Nintendos do not usually have open. So you could write, by putting in the proper commands, you could basically write a warp to the end of the game, and then you just open a door and it warps you to the end of the game. And in the run, quote unquote, they also programmed Snake into the game.
Like Snake, the little like eat the thing and get larger.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
Flash game or like Solid Snake from Metal Gear Solid?
Like Snake, like the Flash game. Like
Just light Goombas up.
no, no, no. It was Mario's head, I believe, was the head of the snake, and then Yoshi eggs popped out behind him.
Nice.
And all of it was on a regular cartridge. Like, it wasn't, they didn't do anything weird to the piece of hardware. They had to use a specific piece of hardware to put all of those weird inputs in, but it was all stuff that you could do, with regular controllers.
Provided you had a multi-tap, sure.
Yeah, provided you had a multi-tap, and I think it was like a Nintendo Paint, like a Mario Paint mouse, and like a what was the other one? I think it was like a light gun, a duck hunt gun. Like it was some weird things that you had to plug into a multi-tap to make this happen, and very specific inputs that you would have to put into them. But if you did, you could make an ordinary copy of Super Mario World, go straight to the end in like a few seconds, and then allow you to play other games on the cartridge, all in memory. And those are the speed runs where I'm like, okay, this is now
you basically
no longer...
hacked this game. It doesn't exist anymore.
Yep. Speed runs where what you're exploiting is no longer just like here the system's as articulated. It is going one or two levels deeper and realizing that, it's the moment when you stop thinking. It's like that Matrix moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
When it's like, up until that point, Neo is fighting humans as if they're humans, and then he realizes, oh wait, they're not humans, and I'm not a human right now. I don't
It's
need
an
to do any
interesting.
of this.
It allows sort of an interesting sort of postmodernism too, sort of game as pastiche, when you can manipulate it that way.
There's actually a really rich history with the development of speedrunning and some of the different ways you can quote unquote speedrun a game or plan the route for a speedrun. We can actually throw speedrunning all the way back to the early 90s. And one of the very first, if not the first game to be properly speedrun was actually the first Doom game. And one thing that made that possible to speedrun was part of the game allowed you to record locally, record clips of the game itself, as part of the game on the PC. And this is early / mid 90s, and people could record their gameplay and post it and say hey, here's how fast I beat this game. There was a couple websites that popped up. I don't know what they're called, but there was a couple of websites that was just specifically Doom speedrunning websites where you post videos and do different stuff. People started throwing out challenges. Can you do a Doom speedrun with no weapons, only your fists, or only your melee attacks, whatever it was, or kill everything in the game, or kill nothing in the game. The Doom speedruns were one of the first births of categories, quote unquote, where a game could be beaten on what we would refer to as any percent, which is a game that is all you have to do is get to the end, doesn't matter how, you can skip as much content as you want, or a more completionist kill absolutely nothing in the game or kill absolutely everything in the game. These different conditions can be added to a speedrun to flavor it up. So there's a lot of different ways you can redefine a category of speedrunning. Now, I have a question for you, Gino. Of the different types of speedrunning categories, do you prefer to watch completionist speedruns or any percents, or weird wacky runs, or is just any speedrun that kind of piques your interest good for you?
I mean, my preference is the exploiting of systems sort of runs. I that's always the most intellectually stimulating because there's so much going on that's not playing the game, and as a programmer, that's always fascinating to me. But I definitely, unless it's a 100% on a game that I absolutely love or is pretty short, I generally don't like 100% runs because I don't care enough about all of the little nuances of some games to collect absolutely everything. So a straight, normal, by the books, beat it as fast as you can tends to appeal to me, outside of the glitch fest, I'm going to do this thing and now this game doesn't even run anymore sort of nonsense.
So now I always like the sort of ridiculous challenge ones where they just sort of pick some ridiculous condition to satisfy, because I think it's such a pure sort of video game style representation of that George Mallory quote. I'm sure you've heard the quote. Maybe you don't know it was George Mallory. He was a mountaineer. And they asked him why he wanted to climb Mount Everest. And his answer was because it's there, right? And I just think that's it. When you think about speedrunning, that's just such a great representation of, all right, why are we doing this? There's no like reward for it really, except maybe some slight recognition. But you did the thing because it was hard, and that makes it fun and interesting.
Yeah. And I definitely appreciate that, like just speedrunning as achievement. It's just some games, like I watched a Super Mario Sunshine speedrun at the last AGDQ, and Super Mario Sunshine is a game that I don't have much affection for, as we've covered on this show in the past.
Yeah, as we've all experienced.
But like watching them complete each of those levels, like some of the stuff they were pulling off, it was amazing. The sort of jumps that they were hitting and how consistently they were able to hit all of them and all of that stuff. But at a certain point, at least from a viewership perspective, it feels like watching, someone with immense technical skill, like a juggler or like all these other sorts of skills, juggler, stuff that you'd see at like a halftime show, right? Unique skills that are really specific that if you don't have intense affection for the thing, at a certain point, like you understand that it's very difficult and what they're doing is very impressive, but the specifics don't grab you enough, and so that's where I tend to go.
Especially juggling's a good comparison because you really have no sort of frame of reference for how difficult it is if you've never, like I've never tried to juggle. So intellectually, I appreciate, this must be incredibly difficult, but like there's no visceral reaction as far as I'm concerned.
I think juggling's pretty accurate because I can juggle, and when I learned how to juggle is actually pretty similar to when I learned a technique in speedrunning. Like when I was teaching myself how to juggle, my dad taught me how to do it mechanically, but I had to practice until I could actually do it. And it was sort of like I'd pick it up like maybe once a week. I'd just like try it, like on like one random day out of the week, and I would fail and I'd get frustrated and then I would quit. And then I'd come back like 2 weeks later and I would try it again and I'd fail, and so I would just quit. And then like all of a sudden, just like one time, like my muscle memory was like just in the right place at the right time. And I was like, wait, this is it. I feel it now. And when I practice a speedrun or practice a glitch, I'm usually just like slamming my face against failure until one time it just clicks. I'm like, wait, I was close. Let me repeat what I did a second ago. I'm really close now. So like that's actually kind of a weirdly good comparison.
Yeah, and when I'm watching speedruns of games that I don't necessarily appreciate, that is how I see it. Like, this is super impressive, and I can watch that for a little while. But then when it's a game that I have touched and thought I knew something about, especially the ones that I thought I knew something about, just learning that there's an entire level of depth that even I, someone who appreciated this game on a deep level, just didn't even understand. It's like, there are times when you're learning a game and you realize that there were glitches and mechanics that you play. Some of these games I've played like 10, 15 times, and I watch one speedrun and I learn that everything I thought I knew was good. Everything I thought was good is not. Everything I thought was effective is slow, and actually I could have been doing it completely differently if I had known.
That's how I felt when I found the right-click trick in Solitaire. It's like the doors of my mind were burst open.
I want to talk for a bit about 3 like game series real quick, because these are ones that are personally near and dear to my heart, but they also each contributed something really weird and different to speedrunning. So in my I'm a big Nintendo fanboy. Nintendo makes real good games, real popular games, but they also make games that are like some of the most easily busted games. Like, I don't know what it is about Nintendo, but PS and like Xbox games are typically like they aren't as made of bubblegum and shoestrings as some Nintendo games are. I mean, they can be because those systems are more like moddable, like more hackable to some degree, but there's a couple that jump into my mind, and it's the Metroid series, the Mario series, and the Zelda series. Again, game series that are super near and dear to my heart. This is one of the reasons why I like speedrunning, is because I played those games just as a regular fanboy growing up. But then I see people just like completely break them now, and these three series bring to us some of the earliest examples of different things you can look for in a speed run. So Pete, you were interested in like how did they like build the route from start to finish? A lot of the things that people look for actually originated among these three series, at least to the best of my knowledge. So like one of the things that we can talk about in the Metroid series is sequence breaking. There's certain like that game, like most other Metroidvania style games, typically you progress in the game by unlocking some kind of ability or upgrade or something that allows you to open some new door or, you know, get past some new environmental hazard. Well, because those games are in many ways non-linear and you can go to different worlds or different sections at one time or another, and the order and sometimes doesn't really matter, there was kind of an idea when the developers made the game of like how a player might normally go through it. Even there could have been like one or two options, but there's some Metroid games where if you are aware of certain upgrades you can actually skip huge parts of the map by having these upgrades in a different order than the developers intended. This even extends into other Metroidvania games, like Game of the Year Valda Story Abyssal City has speedrun tactics that involve getting certain upgrades before you may have been presented with those before.
Just another thing that makes it so great.
Yeah, and just deserving of a real Game of the Year
I wish
title.
we could give it to it every year.
I'm sorry,
Metroid...
I was making a face. I guess were there rotten eggs in my apartment all of a sudden? I don't know. Something smelled weird. Something smelled wrong.
So yeah, the Metroid series is, I guess, one of the earliest, or maybe the most popular or well-known games that involves sequence breaking, which is one popular way to plan a route of a game. The Mario series is one of the earliest games that like abuses like movement and momentum and like game input mechanics. Like one of the examples that I'm thinking of the most actually is in OG Super Mario 64. When they programmed that game, you had a long jump, right? Okay, that's cool. You like hit the crouch button and A at the same time and you could long jump. And they programmed like very specific physics for the long jump. And when you long jump towards something, you go up in the air, you can control a little bit of how far you go by pushing forward or back on the control stick, which is really cool. But at some point you land, right? However, the way they actually program the long jump is if you pull back as if to slow yourself down, they didn't put any cap on how much that backwards acceleration could go. It could just go on forever. You could just keep accelerating backwards as long as you were in the air. So until you hit the ground, you could long jump and then hold back, and you just keep accelerating faster and faster and faster and faster backwards. But what they had to do was find a way to keep Mario in the air pseudo indefinitely. So they'd find all these little like places where you could do a long jump, land funny, and he would like freak out for a second, start like making these weird like glitches and noises, and then he would just shoot backwards at like 1,000,000 miles an hour, and it would actually just rocket him through like doors and walls and parts of the game that he shouldn't have even been able to interact with. That was one of the ways that you can get through. One part of the game is called the Endless Stairs, and you have to have like 70 or 90 stars to get to the top of the stairs, or else it'll just go on forever. 70, yeah. Well, if you do that, you move at the speed of infinity, so you beat those stairs. That's a really cool mechanic that like abuses like momentum or movement, and some other notable games that abuse movement are Ratchet and Clank speedruns. They abuse movement all the time. Like there's like movement abuse in almost all speedruns now. Dark Souls has weird movement abuse. It's just super cool. And the last game that I want to talk about in this like series was the Zelda series. Ocarina of Time has a speedrun now that can just take you from the Deku Tree to the end of the game as a grown-up or as a kid. I don't
as a kid with a stick.
Matter. Yeah. As a kid with a stick, it just takes you to the fucking end of the game.
It only works. I could be wrong in this, but doesn't it only work in the Japanese version though?
I think that might be true, but I know that speedrunners just always pick the Japanese version of a game because the text goes by faster. You can like put more characters in, like you can say more sentences with fewer characters in Japanese.
That's true.
So, like, a conversation that would take like 8 button presses of dialogue may only take 4 on the Japanese version.
And it loads faster because there are fewer characters to load.
Yeah. Yeah, so one of the cool things about the Zelda series was that it gave us like warping to the end of the game, which is another way to speedrun, is to just skip the whole freaking game in and of itself. And there's ways that you can get what is like a loading screen to load something else instead than it was supposed to load. And you can do that again by like making the game like clip out, using frame perfect tricks. Also, Ocarina of Time introduced frame buffering or frame buffing by like repeatedly pressing the start button over and over again to like pause the game and start it over again. Actually, the Mega Man series did that before. Mega Man did it earlier than Zelda did, but you would do that in Zelda, and in Mega Man, if you have like a hitbox of some kind of projectile on a boss, and you pause the game, and then you unpause it, and you pause it, and unpause it, it'll like hit the boss multiple times. So you can just like annihilate bosses in technically like one hit. It's super cool. Like all these parts of speedrunning came from different games. And now together we have this like amalgamation of all these different tools we can look for that help us plan the overall routes of games. It's super fascinating.
Yeah, and it feels almost like when you're solving a puzzle and you realize that actually, I feel like it's almost when I realized why blue was such a good color in Magic, because all the other colors have these really understandable, grokkable things like
Wait,
red
do
is.
you mean like Magic the game or Magic like Penn and Teller?
Like the game, the card game.
Okay. Gotcha.
Card game, not Penn and Teller. No, with Penn and Teller, it turns out that sleight of hand is really that's OP.
I was gonna say, like, I don't recall like the color blue being super important, but I'm curious where Gino goes with this.
No, I mean in Magic the Gathering, it's all the other colors had these very clear things that they're good at, and I could understand why, like, being good at creatures, being really fast, doing a lot of damage, playing really big things, being able to kill things real well. And blue's got a bunch of things like drawing cards and sending things back to their opponent's hand, and their creatures are defensive, and some of their things kind of are evasive. So it kind of made a little sense, but when I realized that the thing that blue is good at is manipulating the game itself and taking fundamental things that you understand to be part of the game and screwing with them, that's actually what's the most devastating thing. Like, blue has a lot of things like you draw one card a turn. Actually, that's a really fundamental thing about the game, and if you break that, you can do all sorts of ridiculously powerful things because the game expects you to get one card a turn. Like, it's balanced for that. It's not balanced for you to get 3 or more. It's not balanced for you to be able to take extra turns all the time. But blue is the color that kind of gets to do stuff like that. And so when you're screwing around with the raw mechanics of the game is as powerful or more powerful than doing things within the rules, within the bounds. And interacting with the fundamentals matters as much or more. And I feel like speedrunning gets at a lot of that as well. Especially like what you were talking about, Billy, with Legend of Zelda. The way that trick works is that you're manipulating memory by making sure that at the moment you hit this warp, it has in memory this, basically the warp to the final fight. And that's just manipulating that. As someone who's learned a little bit of computer like security stuff, that is kind of how you execute some pretty malicious hacks on machines, is by putting commands into memory that the original programmer did not intend to be read. And so you can write programs into memory spaces that the original programmer didn't expect you to hit, and then just allow the code to execute as it thinks it should. And all of a sudden, it executes code that was never supposed to be there. And that's basically what you do for Legend of Zelda. It's always really interesting to see the ways that speedrunners come up with attacking these problems.
Now, I like, one of my favorite things about speedrunning now is that a lot of times, or in some cases, it's not about speed anymore. It's about what you can do in a game. And there's 2 things I want to just note really quick as cool side projects of speedrunning. Like, when we think about speedrunning, we think about getting from the start to the game to some objective fast. There's also like a subcategory of just like exhibition type things. Two that come to mind that I think are particularly interesting is there's a run of 4 Mario games consecutively. It runs 4 Mario games with 1 controller with a TAS software. TAS meaning like tool assisted speedrun or tool assisting software, whatever it is, but tool assisted speedrun. People were able to plan the route so that a computer with 1 uniform set of controller inputs controlling 4 different video games could beat those 4 different video games. The exact same set of inputs would be applied to all games. And so it had you like, it had like Mario like jumping in random places and just like running into walls while the other games were doing stuff important. But it was able to beat all 4 of those games with 1 uniform set of inputs done by a computer. Now a human didn't do it, right? That's a different kind of speedrun. It's like a tool-assisted speedrun. A software was developed to play a Mario game. That kind of falls in this category too, because the kind of teamwork and community footwork to go into this is required nonetheless.
Just the meticulous planning.
People had to break apart 4 games.
Yeah,
and
incredible.
I mean, they had to say like, okay, like in this exact time, what does Mario need to be doing in game number 3? And is that going to conflict with games number 1, 2, and 4? Oh, yeah. If that would kill Mario in game 1, okay, we have to like back them up, do like a jump, get them resynced again. Like it's insane. So the other type of run that I wanted to talk about was one that would allow perhaps disabled players to still play a game. Here's an example. The speedrunning community for Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time got together for GDQ a couple years back, and a player did a blindfolded run of all the childhood bosses, of like all the childhood dungeons. So you did like Deku Tree, Dodongo's Cavern, and Jabu Jabu's Belly, and like maybe 1 or 2 other things. And then the run ended when he picked up the ocarina from the bottom of the river in that game. Like that's when he like said time, and then like the run is over. That wasn't a full game speed run, but it was like a demonstration of something cool. Well, like somebody like wrote in, or they like got in touch with the person and said, hey, like I'm actually blind and I would love to play Zelda. Like, could you guys finish the run and get to the end of the game? And this player got like a manuscript in Braille of all the directions for how to play Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time blind. And I don't know the full story, but I think it took that person like maybe a year or so. But like they beat Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, and they were blind. But the people that built that speedrun had to know all the ways that you could not use sight to get to the end of that game, and it usually involved them like making like very specific position movements and like specific types of jumps and rolling and like smacking things with your sword so you know what wall you're up against, because it'll sound different depending on if it's wood or metal or whatever. Like, and it has ways of finding yourself when you get lost. Like if you go off script and you get lost, it's like if you're lost and you're in this general part of the world, do X, Y, Z and you'll get back on track. Like all those contingencies had to get planned, and that's a whole different area of speedrunning that is, I guess, like it's really like the most prime and like distilled version of routing, making the route.
And that's really empowering, honestly. Like that was one of the things when we had on the GBCR Nicky Rooney, who's our foot master. He completed Super Meat Boy with his feet. He completed Spelunky with his feet. And when he completes those runs with his feet, I always think maybe there's someone out there who doesn't have hands. Or maybe there's someone out there who maybe their hands don't work well enough to play these games.
Absolutely.
Or any sort of reason why they need an alternate control scheme. And seeing someone who is capable of doing it means that it is possible for conceivably anyone. If someone can do it, then another person can follow that run, see how they did it, and replicate it. And so speedrunning definitely gives some avenues of play that otherwise would not have been exposed or explored at all.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's easy there's something easy about video games just to be generally dismissive about. Like, not for us because we're fans, but so the world at large. And I think it's even easier to be dismissive of these sort of speed running achievements, right? Like if you don't care that somebody can beat The Legend of Zelda, for whatever reason, you care even less if they can beat it blindfolded or not, which seems odd considering that's a more difficult and more impressive achievement. And I mean, not that it needs a justification, but that in and of itself, the fact that maybe this could open up avenues to gaming for other people, if you need that justification, that can at the very least serve as one.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's similar to like if you don't necessarily like basketball, you might not necessarily like the Harlem Globetrotters. Like the fact that they can do stuff that's fun and goofy, that might not also engage you. But
Yeah.
I feel like just understanding that another human being has dedicated a large part of their life to a craft and to mastering a skill, even if it's something that you don't necessarily find valuable, there's an intrinsic respect that you should provide to another person.
I completely agree, but I do think there's something interesting about, like, if we return to the point about juggling, right? Like, I don't really care that much about juggling, but I'm inherently more impressed by somebody who could juggle 10 balls blindfolded versus just juggling 10 balls. But there's something strange about video games where it's like, okay, if I think they're pointless to begin with, anything that seemingly makes them more difficult also makes them more pointless, such that I'm less impressed. So, like, for people who don't care to begin with, they seem to care even less if you can do it with your feet, even though that's harder. It's odd.
I mean, I think that's just dismissiveness at work in general.
Yeah, right. Maybe dismissive, it doesn't admit of degrees like I'm trying to make it seem.
I mean, I just think that once you're dismissive, and you are hell-bent on not giving respect to something, I feel like when someone then tries to confront you with something that should change your mind, you oftentimes become more entrenched in your original position.
You just double down.
You just double down on it.
Yeah, you might be right.
Hey, I have a couple of just quick notes I wanted to add when I mentioned that blindfold speedrun and
absolutely.
stuff. I wanted to call the actual people that did. So I didn't want to tell their story inaccurately. The speedrunner who did the blindfold speedrun on the AGDQ was Runner Guy 2489. And then the person who was the blind player of Legend of Zelda. Hold on. I just had it up.
Well, Billy, what?
Yeah, I've got it now. Yeah.
Oh.
The person's name was Terry Garrett. It took Terry over 5 years to beat Ocarina of Time, but they did it blind. It's really cool that I just want to make sure that I got those people's names right and their stories right.
Oh, absolutely. And I think this points to a larger thing that's interesting and endearing about the speedrunning community. And I think that's just that it is a communal effort most of the time. I think part of it comes from art. If you're going to sort of prove and document this speedrun, that comes with noting your methods, your techniques, and once you note them, other people get to use them as well. But it's just one of those things that, I don't think anybody, maybe you want to be the first person to do it, but like when Roger Barrister broke the 4-minute mile, it's not like a whole bunch of other people were pissed. They were just like, cool, he did it in 4, I'm going to do it in 3:59. And then it becomes, everybody shares their techniques and try to just drop it lower and lower and lower.
And Pete, correct me if I'm wrong, but when they were talking about the 4-minute mile and how it could or could not be beaten, I think some physicists, like some physicians, were saying like that's like
kill him.
Yeah, like that's like a measure of the human limits. Like humans cannot run a mile in less than 4 minutes. It's like that's one of like the hard boundaries of the of the human condition. You can't beat a 4-minute mile.
People thought it would kill like whoever tried to do it. Interestingly enough, this doesn't have anything to do with the conversation, but the same sort of idea came up when like steam trains were first invented. That they were like, listen, the human body can't handle going 70 miles an hour. Like, it'll just disintegrate. Because, like, we had never gone that fast before.
Yeah. I mean, that's a fair point. And relative speed was not a thing that you had to think about on. Like,
No.
you didn't necessarily give too much thought to it when you were on a horse.
Yeah.
That the human body's okay with relative speed.
Do you know how the person who ran the 359-mile trained? Trained to do that?
On a mountaintop?
So like I actually read about this from weirdly enough, I bought a t-shirt from Joe Manganiello or whatever his name is.
And all this information was just on the t-shirt.
Wait, you bought a t-shirt from, is that the actor?
Yeah.
From True Blood and Magic Mike?
Yeah.
Oh, the really big dude? He was in How I Met Your Mother too?
But yeah, so he and his brother have 359 like incorporated, and they like had this t-shirt that I bought when Joe Manganiello was a guest star on Critical Role. And it made me research like how that person ran the 359 mile because I was just interested in it. But it kind of relates to speedrunning, right?
Wait. I just want to say really quick. I thought that you meant that you bought it from him, like he was hanging out.
Like he was just hawking t-shirts.
He was hawking t-shirts. Or it was like at a convention and he was really down to earth and was like, no, let me take it over for a second.
He's like, no, I got this side hustle. I was like, dude, you seem to be doing pretty well. I don't think you need to sell shirts.
Look, when I'm lifting all these weights, I got to stay motivated, stay humble.
Well,
you can continue with your anecdote. I just
yeah. What I read though was that instead of running the mile over and over and over again to try to trim down the time, the runner practiced by getting 4 different people that could run the quarter mile in a minute or less.
Yeah.
And then when he could do that consecutively, like beat those guys in a race consecutively, he was like, now I can staple all the pieces together, and now I can do a sub 4-minute mile.
When he did it, when Bannister did it the first time, I know he had 4 pacers going with him. Or maybe he didn't have 4. He had at least 2. But and he would just track them as they went.
Right.
Okay, so he basically had 4 pacers who each were running a sub 4-minute mile and said, I just need to match these people. And then
they were running a sub-minute. They were probably running a minute or so quarter mile, yeah.
Okay, so they were running like a minute quarter mile, and he just kept pace with them.
Yeah, he had to just beat that person, and you were good.
That's a really smart way to do it. Break it down. Take a big problem, break it down into its constituent parts.
And he did. Well, we do that when we speedrun a game. We say, hey, look, I've got to get from the start of the game to this spot. What do I do to do that? And then once you complete that objective, you just staple together over and over and over again what the different parts of the run are.
Yep. Well, I think, was there anything else about speedrunning that y'all want to talk about? Anything about the runs that you've done, Billy? Or any of the things that you want to call out or highlight?
Sure, yeah. So there's let me think about how I want to talk about this, because I don't want to give too much away, because I'll be doing some of this for GPCER, but the speed runs that I've done in the past were more like casual runs, right? This iteration of a speed run is probably going to be the closest to a proper speed run as I've ever done. Now, I'm not going to get the time down to a professional's time, right? But it's going to be the closest. It's going to be the most speed run proper thing that I've done. It's going to involve level skips. It's going to involve duplicating items. It's going to involve a really specific sequence that I'll do certain events in the game in order to trigger certain events. It's going to be my most planned out run of all of them. So when I did the Shadow of the Colossus run, I really only had to practice the game and being good at the game. There were ways that I could practice parts of the run. For example, the third Colossus, there's a way you can get launched from the tip of his sword up to his shoulder or his chest or his head, and that would skip one of the parts of that boss fight with just making him like break one of his armor pieces so you can climb up his arm. But you can have him just kind of launch you up to his head if you time something correctly. That required practice. There was a skip that you could do in, I think, the like 9th or 11th one, the one where you have to like make him fall down a cliff with a fire stick.
Yes.
I forget which number that Colossus is, but there's a way you can do it so that you trigger the sequence of him falling off a cliff by him launching you off the cliff with an attack.
Huh.
So like there's a way you can drop the torch on the ground because you're not holding it, he aggroes to you and he'll run at you, right? But if you pick up the torch right as you're about to get hit, all the game checks is the Colossus near the edge? Is the player holding the torch? If both those boxes are checked, the cutscene starts. But you get hit off the cliff. But because you're in a cutscene, you're not taking any damage. But what happens is the Colossus falls off the cliff and there's a specific like timer that starts. Normally, you're up top and you have to either jump carefully down and get to the Colossus or wait for the Colossus to get up and come back up and start the whole fight over again. But if you do that skip, you get thrown off the cliff, the Colossus is laying right next to you, and you just wail on him until he's dead. And it skips basically the whole fight. So those are two things that I really liked about the Shadow of the Colossus run, but those weren't really speed runs as much as they were, like, I guess the second one was.
It was kind of a speed run.
Yeah, it involved like tricking the game.
It was a very specific.
I just really had to practice playing that game, and then I just played it 4 times until I got my stamina up to climb the tower. So that was cool, right? I planned out the Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles run a lot more, but ultimately it failed. Like I missed something. When we got to the final boss, we didn't have what we needed to actually deal sufficient damage. We were like missing kind of item combination or something.
Our problem was not that. Our problem was that in learning the routes, some people did not learn how to play the game like especially and memorize the patterns that the final boss uses. So we ended up having all of the right things and we were in the right place to make this happen, but there was the part where we actually had to do the dang thing, and I was the only person who had banged my head against the final boss long enough to know how to take down most of its forms, like in a like playing it straight up. And so when we needed to take this boss down, it was like this actual speedrun strategies involve very specific movements from all the characters and good coordination and teamwork, and we had not attempted it as a four-player party before. And so I was like, okay, you guys just like don't die, and I'm going to try and take this thing down by myself because you're just getting in my way.
Yeah, there's no substitute for doing the dang thing.
Yeah, that one we just need to do the dang thing. Wasn't as good as it could have been. Yes. We got to the final boss, but we couldn't finish the game.
Yeah, we needed to do the part where we killed the thing.
The execution wasn't there. So that's I would not chalk that up as like a properly run route, right?
Yeah.
And then what I'm doing right now feels a lot more like speedrunning because I'm planning a Dark Souls run, and the people that actually speedrun this game can do it in like an hour or two. You know, and if they use more glitches and more skips, it can be done in like 30-some minutes. And like, if people are familiar with Dark Souls, right now, like, it's taking me like 4 hours to get to Anor Londo. Just because there's some glitches that like I'm not very good at doing, so it takes me 30 minutes to try to practice the glitch or practice the level skip. You know, like I'm wasting so much time by trying to actually do the glitches that it'd be faster if I just did the intended route.
Mm-hmm. But you'll get there.
So like, I will. But what I hope to be showcasing in my my Dark Souls run, and again, I'm not really going to talk about the GVC or event because I'll announce the incentives and everything in my actual event that I'm doing later. But some of the things that I'll be exploiting in that game is what I hope to be 3 different level skips. I'm going to there's like 8 bosses in that game that you don't have to fight if you can skip parts of the level, so I'll be skipping a lot of bosses. I'll be duplicating items so that I can get essentially unlimited souls and humanities and unlimited uses of Homeward Bone. And like having Infinity Souls and Humanities, it doesn't actually make me that strong because it's going to be an SL1 run, right? Like I can't level up, so I can't just go to level 1,000,000 and be invincible. I can only spend so much money in the game. It's just going to mean that I don't have to fight a single enemy that I don't want to, so that I'll never have to grind, which is painful for me to say.
What?
But I'll never have to grind because I can just like get free souls whenever I want.
Yes,
so it'll
if you
make me
could
not have to do
it,
that.
not if you should.
Right. And so I'll be doing three level skips, item duplication, and I think that's most of the things that I'll be doing. But like this run is much more planned because I'm having to say like, okay, I know that I want to do all these things, and I can do all of them discreetly. But what I have to figure out is my particular order that I want to go in.
Yeah. And for me,
because there's some glitches that I cannot do, so I can't do the run. Like I can't just watch someone else speed run and do it because there's like glitches that I'm trying and I just cannot make them work. So I have to do the game in other ways.
You'll get there. And for me, I mean, Final Fantasy runs tend to not be that involved with glitches. The interesting thing for me was that I realized in preparing for Final Fantasy VIII that the way I had been playing that game since I was little was the way that speedrunners play it.
Yeah.
And I realized that
when you got
actually
Excalibur 2, right?
No, that was 9. 9 that was actually very different for me. I usually played 9 pretty completionist. Not all the way, but enough that I was playing legitimately. There are mechanics that I did not use that are necessary for speedrunning. But 8, that was the game when it turned out that the way I'd been playing it for years and years and years and years was pretty much the way to play it. And I had to do very little tweaking. Like, when I played that game with my significant other, I was able to finish it in like 20 hours. And I was like, I wonder what the speed run time is on this game, because we were like taking our time with this, and I wasn't focusing all that much all the time. And I got it in 20, and this game's supposed to be 40. So I wonder what the speedrun time is. And I looked at it, and it was like 12 or 13. I'm like, if I just was paying attention the entire time I was playing this and actually focused, I wonder if I could probably get in that ballpark. And learning the speedrun, I think I finished in like 14 or 15 hours when I did it. But I was playing it with like additional things thrown on top because it was a GBCR run. So it was really fun to see that even this game that I played for so long, I had stumbled on the quote-unquote right way to play it.
Right.
And then for the other games, it was a lot more like precise notes, learning the route, practicing the route, making sure that I don't forget anything. Like I needed someone with notes kind of following along with me, making sure that I didn't forget any steps. It almost felt like a recipe for efficient play. And nothing will ever top, I think, getting to the end of Final Fantasy IX, being like having a minute or two left on the clock to get Excalibur 2 and barely getting there. Like I think it was within 10 seconds. If I had taken 10 seconds longer, I wouldn't have been able to finish the game. So learning speedruns is very fun. I would recommend people try it at least once with a game that you love, because you will never see it the same way again.
Yeah, at the very least, you'll learn something.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate cool thing for me, is I get to re-love a game that I played so much of. I get to play it in a totally new way. So, like, I don't necessarily want to say that I love Dark Souls, because Dark Souls kind of hates me.
It hates everyone.
It hates everyone that tries to play Dark Souls. But when I was practicing the Shadow of the Colossus runs, that made me like appreciate that game a lot more, because I was paying so much attention to what the developers had made. I was looking at their artwork with a completely new, like through a completely new lens of scrutiny that I had never done before, and it made me re-experience that game like it was new again. So if you really like one particular game, chances are you can go onto the forums and go into the communities and learn about speedrunning that particular game. And I think we didn't do justice to one small part of this conversation, which is the GDQ events that make
GDQ.
speedrunning so popular.
Yeah, AGDQ, something to call out. Like that event and the Summer Games Done Quick, all the Games Done Quick events, like they started in 2010 raising about $10,000. The next year they raised 52. The year after that, 149. Now they raise in January of 2018 $2,294,612.
It's just incredible.
So, like, the amount that event has grown and the amount that they've raised for cancer research is remarkable. And the amount of time and effort, the people who fly out, the people who spend time learning, the amount of vetting that they have to do to even put the event together and figure out what games they're going to showcase this year. Like, they do so much to make this community what it is. It's really incredible.
And it's like noteworthy to call out some of the popular communities that exist, so that if any of our listeners want to hop in and learn some of this stuff, I know that the GDQ events are closely related to Speed Demos Archive, which is a popular speedrunning community. So Speed Demos Archive is one place you can go. Speed Runs Live is like a live stream hosting place. Doesn't Explosive Runs do stuff too, or didn't they have like a section?
Explosive Runs is just basically a stream aggregating site, so it doesn't have any sort of record stuff.
Then I guess we just used it commonly for the GBCERs.
Yep.
Speedrun.com is just another one that exists where you can speedrun games. I learn a lot about speedrunning possibilities of games when I look at a website that's called like How Long to Beat, or like HLTB or whatever. It's like you can look up the average times of beating a game, whether it's a regular run, a completionist run, a speed run, any percent or whatever. Like there's a lot of different ways you can just casually learn about the lengths of games and stuff. So like go into the communities, go into the forums. If you like a game a lot and you want to try to speedrun it, there's ways you can learn. And you can have no speedrunning experience and just like try it out, and you can learn how to do it.
There are resources out there, YouTube videos, all these great sites Billy was just talking about. If this is something you're interested in, and like we said, there's good reasons to check it out. Do yourself a favor, put aside half hour and just watch some of this stuff.
We didn't even talk about like the Let's Play community. Like there are people that just like have YouTube streams up, and all they do is just like play games in really cinematic and cool ways. A totally different kind of speed run.
Yep.
They'll like add commentary or no commentary and stuff. It's wild. Yeah.
So I hope this speedrunning discussion has piqued some interest. We will have some in the fundraiser to come, but we'll have more to talk about that probably in 2 weeks, if I had to guess. So thank you, Billy.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. I'm really glad we could get a quick discussion on one of my favorite gaming topics. I mean, not only is this really cool, but nerds that would have done this otherwise for no good reason now have amazing charities to do this, and what they would have just done for no reward, they can now do and also help tons and tons of people. Like this is unreal.
Thank you, Pete.
Always a pleasure, everybody. Hopefully, like we said, maybe we'll get a few more of you involved in speedrunning generally. Make sure you tune in next week because I got to pick the game, so it will be great. It's a story about my uncle. It'll be good.
And thank you, listeners. If you want to get in touch with the show, Deep Listens Pod on Twitter, deeplistens.libsyn.com. We've got our comment sections, and deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com. And just one quick thing about speedrunning that I want to mention. When a game is exploited completely, when you really get to see the glitches and the nastiness to get through a game, remember that the game was never built to be played that way. And when people made the game, they did not think of the way you're trying to hack at it. That was not in mind. They were designing it with an intent. and it does not show a lack of foresight or a lack of skill on the part of the developers that they did not foresee glitches like these specific exploits that you're exploiting in the speedrun. I've seen this taken up. Rami Ismail, one of the developers from what is the name of the company? Vlambeer Games, makers of such games as Ridiculous Fishing and Nuclear Throne, has brought this up, and I thought it was a really good point that it does not show that the developers are unskilled or that their game is actually bad because you were able to find these glitches in the game and exploit them for speedrunning. Like, speedrunners will sometimes sarcastically say, like, this game's really good. It's really well made. Look what I can do. And then, you warped someplace. And just because you can find a very useful exploit does not mean that the developers did a bad job of testing, necessarily. Usually the way that speedruns shake the foundations and the very suppositions of the developers, they could not have foreseen it, and the game works correctly when it is played normally, and that is kind of how things should be judged. So, just because you've mastered a game, don't get so cavalier.
I think that's a worthwhile point, because a lot of the runners, when they make comments like that, yeah, they're like giving like a wink and a nod to when a game is breakable, but ultimately they're doing that out of love and not out of like real criticism of the developers.
Yes. So the wink and the nod, appreciated. Just remember, it'd be like driving a car into a wall and going, "Why didn't it? Come on, guys, this car, it wasn't out. It should go through it. You made a mistake." It's like, no. Just because you did this really weird thing that we never intended for you to do. Don't be mad at us because unexpected things happened.
I would say for me, like, a game that has no way to like be broken is a pretty uninteresting game.
Yeah, that means they didn't take a lot of risks.
Yeah.
So, till next time, thank you, listeners. Peace.